Hello, my name is Paul Gronke. I'm the director of the Elections and Voting Information Center and a professor of political science at Reed College. I'm excited to share with you today the results of a white paper that is part of the Mapping Election Administration and Election Science initiative of MIT's Election Data and Science Lab. This paper is about the vote-by-mail system in the United States, how its growth and expansion over the last 25 years has affected many aspects of American election administration. I'm going to start by introducing you to the collaborators on this project, starting with Dr. Mindy Romero. Dr. Romero is the founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy. Next, Dr. Henrietta Shino. Dr. Shino is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Alabama. Next, Dr. Dan Thompson. Dr. Thompson is an assistant professor of political science at UCLA. And finally, the project would not have been possible without the support of Michelle Schaefer, managing principal at Magenta Sage Strategies. So I'm going to start this presentation by giving you an overview of vote by mail in the United States, and then we're going to talk about 4 different questions. We're going to, for each of these questions, evaluate what we know and where the research gaps are in order to help us think about an agenda moving forward. Starting by what is voting by mail? Let's set the ground rules here. Vote by mail or mail voting is really an umbrella term that covers at least 3 different administrative regimes: excuse required absentee balloting, no excuse absentee balloting, and universal vote by mail. Our focus here is on the latter 2, no excuse required absentee balloting and universal voting by mail. We also deal somewhat in the report with UOCABA, that is voting by military and overseas voters, but that's a special category. There's important lessons that can be learned there, but is not really a focus of our report. So, what is mail balloting? How did we get here? The growth in vote by mail. As of May 2023, 27 states and D.C. offer no excuse absentee voting. That's up from only 3 states in 1998. 8 states conduct elections entirely by mail, where every eligible citizen on the rolls gets a ballot by mail. Important, however, in most of those states, over half of the ballots are not returned by mail, but they're returned by other methods, most commonly drop boxes. Vote by mail started slow when excuses required 8% of ballots in 1998, growing to 21% in 2016, a whopping growth more than doubling to 46% in 2020, declining to 32% in 2022. You can see the growth in the use of voting by mail and other convenience methods over this long period, the obvious huge spike in the COVID-19 election, but then the decline in 2022, but don't be misled, this is still a substantial increase compared to 2018. Okay, question 1, who uses vote by mail? What do we know? There is no longer a typical by mail voter, right? There are substantial variations in the usage rate of no excuse absentee balloting by age, race, ethnicity, and political party. There's also substantial variation by states, across election ecosystems, by administrative regimes. It really depends on the particular blend or mix of policies that are available in a state and what kind of voters use them. We also know in 2020 that research, particularly by Dan Thompson and his colleagues, shows that there was not any partisan advantage gained by the move to vote by mail and no excuse absentee balloting in 2020. But there was evidence of a divergence, Republicans opting more for, if they could, in-person methods, Democrats opting for vote by mail. What are the gaps in this area and the use rate? We need a more complete picture of the disparity in mail ballot usages. We need to look at more states, and we need to dig down, look across, within states, but across local jurisdictions. This is not it's the first time, it's not the last time you hear me say this. We need to understand a lot more about state, local, special elections and how vote by mail and other administrative regimes affect turnout representation in those areas. We need to monitor the continuing impact of 2020, see whether that was a one-off or how much the impact of that election is going to continue down the road. Question 2, how much do mail ballot voting policies affect participation? What do we know? We know there's a modest effect of vote by mail that's small and statistically significant. We know that drop boxes contribute to improvements in turnout if they're optimally placed. We We know that ballot curing, by providing an opportunity for voters to cure problems with their ballot, again, if implemented well, can improve turnout. No excuse absentee balloting has a more modest effect on turnout, but it's still there, it's still positive. That is very sensitive to the particular mix of options that are available in a state. What are the gaps in this area? We don't know how different arrangements, different mixes of in-person and by-mail voting options, what's the just the right mix to maximize participation? State and local. That's number 2 now. We don't know how vote by mail affects state, local. You hear it from administrators all the time. Boy, in local elections, that's where the real impact, when that ballot arrived for a school board election, a municipal election, but we really have no systematic research on that. Okay, how do vote by mail security policies affect voter participation? What do we know? We know that there are unequal rates of ballot rejection, that these ballot rejection rates are higher for key subgroups in the population. We also know the reasons, the reported reasons for those ballot rejections. What you see on the administrative records also vary by race, by ethnicity, age, and length of voter history. What are the gaps in this area? We need to expand beyond the usual suspects. What we mean here is that much of the research that we just reviewed was driven by litigation. There were lawsuits that were occurred because of some of these inequalities that were evident in the ballot rejection rates, and that allowed scholars access to information that's not available in other states. We need to make sure that that research that is conducted in a relatively small number of states is generalizable to other states. We need to identify the reasons, and what we mean here is the bureaucratic, administrative reasons, not just what's reported, but is there something else going on? Because it's hard to come up with the good mitigation strategies if we don't know what the real reason was for these higher or lower rates. Question 4, costs and public opinion. What do we know? Costs, we don't know very much. We do know that 2 states, Oregon and Washington, report substantial cost savings from moving to universal voting by mail. But those are 2 states where prior to that, 70-80% or more of ballots were being returned by mail anyway. So of course it was going to save them money to eliminate those in-person options. We don't know how generalizable that is to other circumstances. Public opinion is similarly complex. We know generally, not just with voting by mail, but generally voters like the method that they are used to using, and that voters don't like change. That's evident when universal vote by mail has been put in place in states. There's some voters that don't like this. So there's a dip in voter confidence rates that tend to climb as voters get used to this method. We saw a lot of this in 2020. It may have been magnified or exacerbated by political rhetoric, but Republicans and Trump voters in particular expressed much, much lower levels of voter confidence and beliefs in the integrity of our election system after the 2020 election. The gaps here. Election costs continue to be the white whale. We don't have ongoing consistent collection of budget information, so that we can't really track what happens when you put in place vote by mail or something else. Public opinion is also a moving target. We encourage election officials to communicate, to educate, but we don't really have a really good sense about the lasting impact of that on voter confidence. We don't know the role, whether our efforts should be focused at other actors in the political system as a way to try to ameliorate some of these really disturbing trends, in declines in confidence and trust. Our overall lesson, our overall message from this report is that universal mail ballot delivery programs, if implemented well, can modestly improve turnout, can really help particular groups that have challenges in getting to the polling place. But there may be a cost associated with that. The cost might be higher ballot rejection rates and lower levels of confidence. Implemented well, what does that mean? Drop boxes. Voters really love drop boxes. Some sort of ballot curing process, and of course a secure and trusted system for identity verification. Priorities for future research. What particular arrangements, what mix of in-person, early, by mail, what's the most successful system? How does the composition of the electorate change under these different systems? How do these security measures actually work? How can they improve? Is it a matter of education? Is it a matter of learning? What's up with signature verification? How can it be best optimized? Some states and localities have extended the deadline where you no longer need to return your ballot by election day, but they simply need to be postmarked. What is the impact of that system? What's the impact of another system, which is ballot tracking, a method where a voter can be alerted as the ballot moves to the various stages in the system? How can how can voters be encouraged to sign up for ballot tracking? And does it improve their confidence and trust in the election system? What else? What are the key steps? The mail ballot chain is longer. There's additional links. And we got to examine each one of these links to see whether the electorate overall and particular subgroups are impacted, whether there's vulnerability at different points in the chain. State and local, what is this, the third time? You're getting tired? But really, it's really an open area. We need to know a lot more. The real bang for the buck here might be, for example, in local elections. What more can we learn about military and overseas voting? A lot of the work in that area is getting a little stale. It was good work, but much of it is 10, 15, 20 years old. It's time to revisit UOCAVA voting. And lastly, you said this already, more collaborations. Lawsuits are important. Of course, litigation is critical, but we need work to be driven as not always by the interests of litigators, but also by the interests of election administrators. We need to expand the scope. We need to develop and encourage more partnerships in more places where voting by mail has expanded. So this is our contact information, how you get in touch with us. Again, I'm Paul Gronke. You get in touch with Michelle Schaefer. I'm really excited to interact with all of you, present our work, and thank you for watching.